All right, we're getting ready.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Georgia State Railroad Museum. Now, before we get this train underway, I just ask everyone to please follow two rules while we're here on the train. Rule number one, while the train is moving, please stay in your seats. The train will push and pull us without warning from time to time, and if you're not careful, it will knock you off your feet. And secondly, for your safety, please make sure all body parts remain inside the windows at all times, as concrete, brick, and steel structures will pass within arm's reach of the car throughout the tour. With all that said, my name is Patrick. I'll be your tour guide today. Our ground crew today is Adam. He'll be operating our turntable, and he'll be making sure everyone else in the museum is safe while the train's in motion. And our engineer today is Joe, who will be up front in the cabin driving us around the facilities today.
It's gonna be fun.
Now, this museum is preserving the first rail yard in the state of Georgia. It was built by the Central of Georgia Railway, which was this state's most successful railroad company to date. And the Central of Georgia Railway was founded in 1833 by a man named William Washington Gordon. If you don't know who he is, that is perfectly fine. He is not the most famous person in his family. You may be more familiar with his granddaughter, though, who was the founder of the Girl Scouts, Juliette Gordon Low. And even before there was a rail yard here, this ground was important because, believe it or not, we're also on top of a Revolutionary War battlefield. On October 9th, 1779, at 5 o'clock in the morning, one of the bloodiest battles and worst American defeats in the war took place here. The Battle of Savannah only lasted 55 minutes. And at battle's end, conservative counts say that the combined American and French casualties equaled 800 soldiers, whereas the British only lost 50 of their number. But the rest of the details of the battle aren't what's important for the tour. If you'd like to learn more about the battle, the History Museum right across the street has a wonderful exhibit. What's important about the battle pertaining to this tour is there was more than just the British fighting with the French and the Americans here. Alongside the French, helping out the Continental Army, were soldiers from other parts of the world that we would know today as Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Ireland, Sweden, Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, Germany, Poland, and Lithuania. They were all here to help us try and recapture Savannah from the British. Now, decades after the Battle of Savannah took place, upon the ground where the worst of the fighting happened, the Central of Georgia Railway was given 28 acres of land by the city. This property stretched from Turner Street, where that glass tower is on my right, to Jones Street, the road on the other side of our facility on my left. Between 1834 and 1855, there was constant construction between these two streets to create the first ever rail yard and rail repair complex that Savannah and Georgia would ever know. And within the first 10 years of this site's construction, the railroad also was building a 200-mile-long line of rail connecting the cities of Savannah to the city of Macon to our northwest. Now, in just a moment, we are going to roll onto our turntable. This is one of 16 historic functioning turntables left in the United States. It's 85 feet long, powered by electricity, and it's been here now for 102 years. It's the fourth turntable to ever be here on site, and the original table that was here in 1852 was 30 feet shorter than this one, and the original one was powered by hand. But it wasn't powered by hand with a crank. It was powered by hand by a pair of poles, one on each end, that men had to push. That original table was so well balanced that with a train on top of the table, you only needed one man on each pole to spin it. This current platform, with about 50 tons of train on it now, is going to spin using two electric engines that are only 7 horsepower each. Meaning, right now, either at home or at your local hardware store, you will find a lawnmower with more horsepower than what's going to spin us in just a few moments. Now, when we start to spin, that's when things get tricky, because the tracks we're standing on now are in no way connected to the tracks outside. If the tracks are out of place by less than an inch underneath the platform, there's a good chance the train will derail. The only thing stopping that from happening is Adam. And let me reassure you all, Adam is a master of an ancient, mysterious art called eyeballing it, and he knows exactly where the rail should be at all times. With his 10 months of experience, and my almost 3 years of doing these train rides, eyeballing it hasn't failed either one of us here.
Knock on wood.
Now, alongside being a museum, our staff repairs and restores train cars and railroad equipment. And one of our current projects is this silver and blue train car right behind us. This is the 374, and it was here in the 1950s, acting as a relief car for, at the time, the fastest commercial train in the country, the Nancy Hanks. The Nancy Hanks, get on the Nancy Hanks. One cheer for the Nancy Hanks, awesome. The Nancy Hanks was a streamlined locomotive named after Abraham Lincoln's wife, and it could take you from Savannah to Atlanta in 5 hours. That's faster than it takes you to get between both those cities by car today. And this car has been the project of Joe, our engineer, for the past 20 months, fixing it inside and out. But that is one project in the smaller of our 2 workshops. In just a moment, when the rails are realigned, we're going to head down to the far end of the yard to our paint shop, where the rest of our restoration work is done here in the facility. Now, our paint shop, before we head down there, it is one of our youngest buildings. It was constructed in 1925, 100 years ago, and it was built during a decade when the Central of Georgia Railway was at its peak. If we were on this site 100 years ago, on just this 5 acres of the original rail yard, there would be up to 1,000 workers here working 12-hour shifts every single day. Now, in general, working for any railroad in the 1920s was highly prized. The unions were in full swing, so the benefits and pensions were exceptional, and overall, on this site, your weekly paycheck was pretty good. A blacksmith helper's 22-cent an hour wage would hold the same buying power as $17 an hour today. And a journeyman blacksmith or machinist's 85 cents an hour would hold the same buying power as around 150 grand a year. Now, on top of a pretty good paycheck here on site, with the noticeable uptick of workplace injuries in the 1920s, the railroad established an 80-bed state-of-the-art hospital here in Savannah to accommodate the workers. And with the help of some of the first Boilermaker union locals in the country here in Savannah, the railroad established a retirement home for their older workers. And that building still exists today. You can find it acting as the admissions building for the Oakland Island Wildlife Reserve, halfway down towards Tybee Island. Now, our paint shop was second only to the Roundhouse as the busiest building on site. Its 50,000 square foot work floor could hold 32 train cars at any time. And today, the building is home to 2 Australian trolleys, 9 train cars, a 1937 Model 15 Burro Railroad crane, and 2 vintage Ford cars, a 1926 Ford Model T and 1929 Ford Model A. Please keep all hands and arms inside the window while the train is moving. There are some cars here that there are narrow gauge, there's narrow gauge wheel trucks that we'll use sometimes to get in and out of the building. Now, as we enter the building, I'd like us all to imagine that we are here 100 years ago. There would be dozens of people working this floor, either painting or stripping off paint on countless train cars, entering and exiting this building at all hours every day. And that is half the activity that was going on here. We need to include what was going on in the basement below us. The basement is just as big as this work floor. And down there, workers would be testing diesel engines, making and mixing new paint, repairing upholstery and electronics, as well as printing out paperwork and pamphlets for other parts of the site. This entire site was mostly self-sufficient, and it was the largest rail repair facility in Savannah. On top of their own rolling stock, it wasn't unheard of for other railroad companies to send their cars not to the city rail yard, but here to their rival shop to get work done. And this place was generally a 24-hour operation. So if you were working in this building as a night shift painter, you received a benefit that the daytime painters didn't. When the sun went down, the company was nice enough to turn the lights on in here for you. That was the benefit. During the day, the lights were off like they are now. But as you can see, this is not the best place for painting. It's kind of dark in here. 100 years ago, that wasn't an issue. The inside was already as bright as it is outside now. The lights were off because it was a waste of electricity. This type of building is what's called a daylight factory. Most of, if not all of its light during the day came directly from the sun by design. That was thanks to the massive doors and windows that would all be open, but also thanks to the ceiling above our heads. The type of ceiling above us is called a sawtooth. It's a very common style, and you will see it on factories all over the world. In fact, you may have seen a sawtooth roof before and probably not known it. A sawtooth roof is a series of triangles, and for everyone on the top half of the world, the triangles will always run north to south. On the north side of each of these triangles, where you see wavy panels of tin now, 100 years ago, in their place would be quarter-inch thick plates of glass, reinforced with chicken wire running the entire length of the room. This is what allowed for total coverage of this work floor with nothing but natural ambient sunlight from dawn to dusk every single day. And we still use this building today. And on this side of the room, we have two major projects going on. One of them is this red train car on my left. This is one of our oldest train cars, dating back to the year 1911. It was built in the city of Augusta, Georgia, for Georgia Central Railroad, not to confuse it with the Central of Georgia Railroad that used this facility. And it was built in imitation of a Pullman passenger car from the 1870s. Its number is 67, and you may have actually seen this car before on TV and not known it. It showed up in a Disney movie a few years back. How many of you have Disney Plus back at home?
Val,
A few.
I know
Awesome.
you.
Now, how many of you have seen the remake of Lady and the Tramp that came out a few years back? Awesome. Thank goodness it's not just me this time. So, for those of you that haven't seen it, go ahead and watch it. It's overall a pretty decent film. But when Disney was looking for a location to film that movie, they chose Savannah to make the entire thing. And for those of you that have seen it, if you remember when the tramp first shows up, you see him sitting in a red train car and then he runs around a rail yard. That train car, this rail yard, and some of the people Tramp runs by aren't actors. They're members of our railroad operations staff that Disney hired to work that scene in the rail yard where they work on and drive trains every day. And as impressive as the 67 is, it's still not our oldest car. Our oldest piece of rolling stock is this one right behind us. This is the number 2. And unfortunately, we don't know much about it. There's very little documentation on it. Even the previous owner, who is an expert on cars from the time period this one was made, doesn't know much. We know it was made somewhere between 1878 and 1884. And we know that it was built somewhere. Thank you for laughing, I appreciate it. We know it was built somewhere in Georgia, we just don't know where. We suspect it was built here, but we have no way to verify that. The only thing we do know about it is it was rebuilt in 1906 in the Macon Rail Yards owned by the Central of Georgia, and a worker documented some siding work that he had to do on the car during that year. Now, on top of this car in our turntable, there is one more big record we have. This museum is the largest, most complete collection of pre-Civil War railroad buildings in the country. And there is a lot of people we can thank for this place still being here after all this time. But the first person we can thank before all the others is General William Tecumseh Sherman for not burning this place to the ground in the Civil War. From breaking ground to now, this facility has been here in multiple forms for almost 200 years. For something to be around that long, it's had to almost be destroyed once or twice. First time that happened was during Sherman's March. Now, when the South tried to leave the Union, the Central of Georgia was a big supporter of this. And when war broke out, the railroad became the Georgia Confederate Army's personal supply lines. Sherman saw this as an easy target. In his mind, the best way to win a battle is to make sure the battle never happens. Make the enemy unequipped, too hungry, and too sick to even want to fight. So, as Sherman's 63,000 men marched through Georgia, trains were robbed and then blown up, and tracks were twisted around trees like pretzels. A railroad that took 10 years to build was destroyed in 5 weeks. And miraculously, this site was left undamaged, and we have no idea why. But then, 100 years later, the site was almost gone for good. After World War II, the Central of Georgia began to struggle financially. And as highways and cars became more popular as means of transportation, the Central of Georgia began to severely struggle. In 1963, their rival Southern Railway came in and bought the company in a hostile takeover. After they kicked everyone off the site in a single hour, they realized years later they weren't going to use any part of this rail yard. So they decided to sell all the machinery and then began to tear the place apart brick by brick, selling the raw materials on the market. Thankfully, because the demolition was so slow, this gave preservationists enough time to realize what was happening and put a stop to it. In 1972, the city produced the 1833 contract that gave this land to the railroad, and in the contract was some fine print that stated if the site wasn't being used as an active rail yard, the city got ownership of the property back. Then in 1976, the US government designated this place a National Historic Landmark. So even though this place is not part of the national park system, it still receives the same types of protections as places like Yosemite and Yellowstone. Now those bricks that Southern Rail was trying to rip out of the walls and resell, it's these big dark bricks that you see here in the Roundhouse, and it's what our oldest buildings are made of. It's a type of brick called Savannah Gray, and it's very special to Savannah. The iron-rich clay that it's made of has only been found within the waterways around the city, and as far as we are aware, there's only one family that ever knew the recipe. This brick, even though if you pulled one out of the wall, even though it would be bigger and more solid than the brick that's made today, because of its excessive porousness, it both weighs less, but can hold more weight. And this was the brick that half of Savannah was constructed from after several fires destroyed the city in the 1800s. You can still find Savannah Gray brick buildings all throughout the Lowcountry, as far past Charleston.
Up my home city.
And in the 1960s, if you were an owner of one of these brick buildings and you needed new bricks to repair it, you would have to pay top dollar. Because unfortunately, the family that knew the recipe never wrote it down. And the recipe is now lost. A brick that was being sold in bulk, dirt cheap, in the 17 and 1800s was selling in 1963 for $20 a brick. That's the equivalent of $200 a brick in today's money. You can now see why half of our roundhouse is no longer here. Thankfully, the demolition was stopped, but once Savannah got it, now that they had the property, they had no idea what to do with it. So they just abandoned it for 13 years. In the meantime, under the cover of night, people snuck in here and threw wild parties in the 70s and 80s that are still talked about here in Savannah. And after 13 years of this, in 1986, the Civil War movie Glory, starring Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, and Matthew Broderick, picked this facility to make 2/3 of the movie. After that film was released in 1988 and was winning all sorts of Academy Awards, a year later, Savannah turned to our historical society and asked us if we would like to manage this place. And what you see around you now is 36 years of our nonprofit organization's maintenance, work, and care, keeping it all standing so that visitors like you can come here every day and hear the history of a place that was, at one point, not just the center of the city's economy, but also a center of the city's community as well. Now, there's one more thing that needs to be discussed before the tour ends, and it's where we're headed to next. Down past the switch at the end of the line, there used to be a bridge connecting where we are now to the train tracks across the street. Unfortunately, in the early 70s, that bridge had to be destroyed by the city. Too many 18-wheelers were getting stuck under it. Now today, Savannah is the second biggest port on the East Coast. We're second only to New York City. And before I-16 was finished, one of the main routes out of the port for the trucks was right down Louisville Road and under a bridge that was built 40 years before the first car was ever designed. For the big rigs to squeeze underneath, the drivers would have to get out of their trucks, deflate every tire, and then reinflate them all on the other side. As you can imagine, this would be frustrating. And if there's one thing a port city doesn't want, it's frustrated truck drivers. Especially in the 60s and 70s, when the Truck Drivers Union was led by Jimmy Hoffa. Now, Jimmy Hoffa, by reputation, was a very influential, very powerful, and very dangerous man. He had very close friends in the Italian mafia, and Savannah, for many decades, was a known vacation spot for high-ranking Chicago mobsters, including, at one time, the infamous Al Capone. So, a few years before this place became an untouchable federal landmark, when the truck drivers very nicely asked Savannah for help with their little bridge problem, or else, it'd be an awful shame if something were to happen, Savannah very quickly got rid of the bridge. And now because of that, the only way a train can get out of here now is in pieces being carried by 18-wheeler trucks. And if that's not irony, I don't know what is. But the irony continues, because you see that bridge down on the intersection in front of us. That bridge is also used by the Central of Georgia and was built in the 1850s. There are tunnels under that bridge that cars can pass under, and there are signs now that tell you the tunnel is only 12 feet tall. 18-wheelers are often 13 and a half feet tall. Everyone please find your seats. The train is about to move. So that tunnel is 1.5 feet shorter than the height of an average 18-wheeler. There are now scratches inside that tunnel from all the trucks that have gotten stuck under it over the years. And the first time I saw that happen, I was on this train giving a tour. And as I was talking about the scratches in the tunnel, right on cue, a truck barreled down the road and got stuck under the bridge mid-sentence.
Oh yeah, that is.
Thankfully, nobody got hurt and the truck was able to continue on its way. But if I'm being honest, I couldn't have planned it any better even if I wanted to. Now, as we are backing up towards the platform, I'd like to ask everyone, please stay in your seats until you hear the train's horn sound off one time. That'll be our sign from the engineer that we've come to a halt, and we will then be free to get up and disembark. With all of that said, thank you all very much for joining us here on this ride, and we at the museum would like to thank you all personally for your patronage in helping us out with this 36-year-old nonprofit project of ours of education, restoration, and preservation. As we make our final approach, thank you all once again for joining us here at the Georgia State Railroad Museum. Thank you all.
That was fun. We'll see y'all once we get off the train.